because as always in Sri Lanka, there are many, many, many different versions. If any of you have been out there, you will realize that nobody has the entire picture. Everybody has a picture, and no two pictures are alike. I have on either side of me Samanth Subramaniam, the author of this book, This Divided Island, which actually is one of the most honest accounts of the war, post-war, pre-war that I have read. An interesting book. It's non-fiction. There's some fans here. Go,
That's
Samanth.
my wife. It doesn't count.
Well, why
Sounds like you have a lot of family here.
Well, that's Sri Lanka for you. They're all friends here. On my right. Okay, good, good. On my right, I have Romesh Gunasekera with...
Sounds like a boxing match now.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? It does, it does. Well, it is really. Or it will be. Noontide Toll, which has really hit the sweet spot, and in a couple of hours from now, we will hear whether it has won the DSC prize or not. At the moment, it's one of a short list of 5. So go, Romesh. Okay, very quickly, a show of hands. How many of you have read either of these books? Okay, relatively few. Relatively few. So I'm going to get each of them to read a quick excerpt each. Samanth, will you fire
Absolutely.
away? And keep it short because we've got to finish in half an hour.
Very short. I'm almost done already. Just for background, I'm writing about a man who I met in Colombo called Raghavan. Raghavan was one of Prabhakaran's early associates. Prabhakaran went on to found the Tamil Tigers, and Raghavan met him when he was very young. So I'm just going to read out a short excerpt that hopefully kind of details how a young Tamil man in the mid-70s kind of fell into militancy. Raghavan did not find it easy to explain how exactly he went from being one of Jaffna's juvenile delinquents to being a tiger. The transit in his memory was organic and inevitable, as if there were only one kind of political education to be had by a young man in Jaffna at that time. He'd go to the Jaffna library and read nationalist papers like Vidudalai, Freedom, and then he would pick apart their contents with 2 friends from his village. Through a neighbor, he met Jiva, a thin, soft-spoken man who once tried to assassinate a Tamil member of parliament for the sin of voting for the constitution. 2 other militants from the Tamil New Tigers, a group formed by Prabhakaran in 1972, were also hiding out in Punnalai Kattuvan around this time. Raghavan remembered Chetty in particular. My job was to take him from one hideout to another on my bicycle using a different route on each occasion, he said. Chetty kept a Smith & Wesson revolver upon him at all times. I was thrilled when I saw it because back then in Jaffna you didn't see too many firearms. A strange problem of sartorial etiquette presented itself here. Chetty wanted to stuff the gun into the waistband of his trousers where it could be hidden from view by the panels of a long shirt. But good Jaffna boys always tucked their shirts primly into their pants. To fail to do this would look so slovenly that it would attract dangerous attention. Finally, he decided to wear only sarongs because that way he could leave his shirt hanging out, he said. He wore a belt around the sarong and stuck the gun in there. Much later, the sarong became our trademark of sorts. We'd practice pulling our shirt quickly out of the way and drawing the gun. Raghavan laughed hard at this memory, at the sheer triviality of their problems during the early days. Chetty never allowed Raghavan to handle his gun, much less fire it, so Raghavan saved up the money he earned from tutoring students and bought a second-hand .32 from a local thug for 400 rupees. He thought the Tamil New Tigers would accept him into their ranks if he had his own gun. So I went to them with the pistol and told them I wanted to join the group. Chetty asked me for the pistol and didn't give it back. Chetty, who at 26 was a full 10 years older than Raghavan, told him, "You're too young. We'll recruit you later. Now you should just study." Later, Raghavan learned, Chetty held up a cooperative store with his .32.
Ladies and gentlemen, Samanth Subramaniam. Romesh?
Okay, we didn't plan this actually, this boxing match, as it were, but I've got a slightly sartorial piece as well.
Excellent, excellent.
And I'm going to take 2.5 minutes, okay? And this is really difficult, you know. When you write novels, you often have to try and present a novel which might have taken 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 300 pages, into like a 2-minute slot. So I really like short stories because in theory you have compressed it, but this is getting really compressed now, 2 minutes for the whole thing. But I'm going to read you the beginning of a story or a piece in this book called Janus. And it's kind of appropriate because Janus is a Roman god, probably actually an Indian god because he's multi-faced. And he is a bit like, he has a head and a mirror image, as it were. So it fits in with our title. He's someone who's looking ahead and looking behind. Janus is the figure that is normally a janitor who opens a door into a new world. Hopefully a writer does that. But it fits here because looking ahead, looking back is what Vasanta, my narrator in this book, is always doing. He's a driver, so he looks ahead, but he checks his rear view mirror to see what's behind as well. So I'm going to read a short bit from when he's driving in the south, actually, so we're moving down south. And he picks up an army man. So it'll be quite interesting to see the difference here. And unexpected, not quite a hitchhiker, but you'll see what happens. I'm also going to stand up just to disturb everything so that TV cameras have to follow or not. We'll see whether they can. I'll try and move out of the way if I can, dodge the bullets, as it were. Anyway, this is how it goes. And it's Vasanta who's telling the story. This is how he speaks. We know about Stalin now. We know a lot about him and his ruthlessness. We know all about his blind spots, his folly, his mistakes with Germany, his mad collectivization. We also know a lot about Mao's blindness, that great leap into a hole, the Cultural Revolution. Great leaders make great mistakes. It's a sort of status symbol. They can't resist. We can see it in our own day, all over the world, from the UK to Ukraine, Italy to Iraq. My father used to say, make big mistakes, make big history. His own were minor, so nobody knew about them except me and a bunch of his old cronies who have now all passed away. Mistakes of not seeing things for what they are. He admired strategy. He'd draw comparisons between Bismarck and Khrushchev as though ships and shoes were the same thing. Or even Gandhi and Rommel as they were brothers on a salt march or something. In the world of the Royal Colombo Golf Club, where he worked, my father worked as a caddy, he was an intellectual giant, a self-taught revolutionary political force bursting into consciousness in the wilderness of crimpling and muddy waterholes. He didn't see that his own life was of very little consequence. His name would be forgotten before the 9th hole. Oi, caddy, what to bugger that with now? His golfers would ask, eyeing the rough. His errors were peanuts, but they pained him. He used to say, a good man will not forget even a misplaced divot, whatever the state of the front yard. But big shots, they're just brazen. When a big man takes a wrong turning, he doesn't back out like you and me. He tears up the whole road and makes a new map. Nobody knows what to do then. If he barges about with enough bravado, he can be a hero. Take Brigadier Bling. Now, despite looking like a shrunken version of Lenin, the forehead a little deflated, the chin knocked back a bit, he became the most popular figure in Colombo's 5-star dance floors during the war. He was often pictured in the society pages of the glamour magazines in a champagne hand-loom kit with silver cuffs, with canyons of glossy flesh on high heels purring above him, grinning like he'd tripped out of a Soviet time warp into our local Neverland. He became a celebrity after blowing up a cave where a tiger chief was meant to be doing an early Saddam. The whole thing misfired. The tiger retaliation was brutal, but Brigadier Bling had nailed 2 second-tier warlords and in the aftermath managed to get the TV cameras in for a victory parade. Next thing you know, he's in the Daily News in full regalia. I recognized him the moment he stepped out of his Peugeot. The car had its nose in the ground. The driver was a soldier. He flagged me down. Take the sir to Ambalangoda, he ordered. What happened, I asked. Bullock, he said, as we came round the bend. Then I saw the creature, hooves in the air, head in the ditch. So army has no backup, I asked. He said, shut up, take him to the guest house. Guest house, said, not 5-star? Just do as you're told, Mr. Van Man. Unlike my father, I knew who you shouldn't argue with. Armed soldiers were at the top of the list, next to policemen and ministers of state, not counting kingpins and top dogs who can wallop you anytime they like. From all the anti-terrorism measures we've been through, I know the importance of establishing authority in times of upheaval. So when he got in, I said, sir, please, fasten your seatbelt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Romesh. Samanth, just to recap what Romesh just said, that with a novel, a short story, it's difficult to express an entire novel in the space of a short sort of passage. You have said in your book, which is not a novel, it's a nonfiction, that you would like to reflect, I can't remember the exact phrase, that you would like to take one image and then multiply it to get an entire picture.
Yeah.
Do you worry when you do that? And essentially that's what you've done in the book. There are a whole series of snapshots of different people that you painstakingly put together. Do you worry that you may somewhat distort the picture by the selective choosing of your fragments? Was it difficult for you to choose the fragments?
Well, I mean, I adopted this approach because I was an outsider. I am an outsider to Sri Lanka. I mean, I lived there when I researched this book, but ultimately I never lived through the war. It never impacted my life as I was growing up in the way it did for so many of you. So I had to figure out a way in which I could use sort of my status as an outsider to provide an honest and as complete as possible a narrative of this war. And it didn't interest me in one way to start from soup to nuts and kind of just almost academically provide the history of the war.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, in a way, to take advantage of what any reader's mind will do, which is that if you provide the image or if you provide a series of images, the reader's mind does the work of extrapolation. Reader's mind does the work of sort of filling in texture and detail. And you're right, I mean, I had to be careful about picking my images because I had to, as you say, be careful about not appearing partisan,
Yes.
about still appearing comprehensive without actually being comprehensive. But this is in a way a journalist's work. I mean, a journalist's work is to go out there and to find the one story that will accurately and objectively and fairly reflect sort of bigger truths about the world around it.
And it's very difficult when you do write about Sri Lanka because everybody in Sri Lanka is partisan.
Yes.
Did you get criticized by both sides or any side or anyone?
I got criticized, I mean, you know, the book is not sort of out for wide release in Sri Lanka itself as yet. But when I was there doing my interviews and I was talking to people, I definitely got sort of a lot of flack from both sides. I mean, I would meet sort of Buddhist monks and they would assume that I came to Sri Lanka with all the political baggage that an Indian journalist would bring. Or a Tamil journalist would bring, which is what I am. And then I would go to the north and I would talk to Sri Lankan Tamils and they would talk about the baggage that I would bring as an Indian. And so you had to kind of negotiate this. And the best way to do it, I found, was just to spend as much time with them as possible. And the more time you spend, the more they stop seeing you as sort of a paper cutout and start seeing you as a real person.
As a human being.
With your own sort of nuances and your own, you may have your baggage, who doesn't? But I think they start trusting you a little more to be able to put that aside and tell their story in a fair way.
Yeah, and Romesh, it's the same thing with you because in your book, you have a whole series of stories. They are essentially short stories, but they are connected, very deeply connected at a much lower level. On the surface, it's deceptively simple prose, but behind that, they're almost like parables, your stories. Moving on from what Samanth said, was it difficult for you to get those stories? Did you have to think long and hard about which stories you wanted to put in? Because they appear random, but they're not.
Okay, my goodness, so lots of questions. Actually, I think when you're writing fiction, it's probably best not to think long and hard too much. because it's very, if you're a fiction writer, and I'm sure there are some here, one of the big things you have to fight is procrastination. And deep thought is a beautiful way of having procrastination that can last for years, really. And there were two things working against this. One was the fact that I wanted to write a book. And the other actually was something, a sort of challenge that I kind of set myself, which I don't know whether it makes sense to anybody else. But I thought that moment I was writing, which was, I suppose, 2 years ago when I started the book, or a little longer, but sort of that period after the end of the war, 2010, 11, 12, those sorts of years, I felt were very special. And very special because this was a moment of transition. And in any society, any country where there's been tremendous trauma, and then there's this moment of transition, there are all sorts of things that are changing. The soundscape, the landscape, the language, the way we look at the world, everything's changing. And in fiction, there are two things you're trying to do. One is reflect change, but at the same time have something that makes sense of the immediate, but also makes sense of the past. And a book has to be able to be read now, and has to be able to be read in 10 years' time. And for this moment, I felt was very, very, very difficult to do that. And a very simple illustration of what I'm trying to get at came with the title itself, Noontide Toll. And a word like toll has a particular resonance at this moment in time, even now, but even more so a few years ago, because there was the toll of the war. And so the word toll would reverberate in any reader's mind, as well as the toll of the tsunami. Yeah. And yet, for someone like Vasanta, my van driver, that would be important, but increasingly, as every day he goes down the highway and has to pay his toll at the toll plaza, this word is going to change. And in 10 years' time, it may have a very, very different sense to it. And a lot of what's going on in people's heads were like that, and that's what I was trying to capture.
Yeah. Now, both of you are essentially not Sri Lankan. You are not, and Romesh, you're English to all intents and purposes. You're certainly an English citizen.
This is a huge new argument you're getting into.
No.
I think for me, just to get that point, in Britain, I think one of the few people who says British these days.
But just simply to ask this question of both of you, how difficult or easy was it for you to extract information from Sri Lankans? Because I'm 100% Sri Lankan, and I can tell you that Sri Lankans always look at you in the face and try and give you the answer that we think you might want to hear. Yeah. So if you ask me whether I like blue or gray, I will think, well, does he look like a gray man or a blue man? And I will answer accordingly. So how difficult or easy was it for you to get the info in both your books?
I don't know. I found it fiendishly difficult. Even apart from sort of clearly your efforts to please the person who's asking you about your choice of color. The government itself was sort of making it difficult for me to be there as a journalist, as a working journalist. So I was there on on tourist visas. I kept renewing them. I made sure that I sort of didn't stick out. I didn't do anything that would attract the attention of the government. And this was a terrible regime to be a journalist in. So there was that. And then travel within the country was sometimes difficult because you couldn't go to areas of the country that was still sort of partially closed off. After the end of the war, you couldn't talk to people freely. So even if somebody wanted to talk to you, there was sort of their own security to think about. So I not only had to think about myself, but also the person who might get into trouble for talking to an Indian journalist. And there were plenty. There's this character in my book whom I call M, who was sort of like my Virgil in Jaffna. He sort of put me in touch with everybody who I needed to know. He would give me sort of context. He came with his own biases, but I remember the first time. I would go to his house in the morning and we would sit there all day and I would have lunch and then I would go home in the evening. So we did this 2 days in a row after I met him, and the second day when I'm leaving, he says, you've come to my house 2 days in a row, there are people watching this house and now they're going to be watching you. And I said, what, you told me this after the second day? But these are the kind of, even apart from then getting information out of somebody, these were the logistical constraints within which
that-
we had to operate.
that
Yeah.
you faced. Ramesh, did you have any?
Well, it's a different approach for me, I guess, as a fiction writer. I don't do it that way. I don't go and ask people. And actually, in a way, it's a lot easier in some respects because if you're writing novels, people are constantly coming up to me and saying, "I've got a story. You must write this." In fact, some very helpful people have even written sequels to my previous books and said, if you're ever stuck, here it is, here's the answer. So that's brilliant, I love it. But in this book, for example, Vasantha does go to lots of places, and he does tell the stories of other people, but they're not my stories, they're not ones that I've gone out in search of, though I have been to, all the places he's been to, but I was there not with the idea of writing a book. The book came much later. Vasantha turned up much later while I was waiting for a story. He turned up, as it were, and as taxis do, not one, but several turned up. But I wasn't interviewing people. I mean, a novelist and a writer's job, a fiction writer's job, I think, is really to listen. You just keep your eyes open and your ears open, and you respond to the world you find. So that's how it is. And I mean, there were occasions. I mean, there are occasionally people in this book. There are occasional army people who've said indiscreet things that I've managed to smuggle into the book, but I try not to identify them. I've met people who worked, on the other side, Tigers, but I don't name them. It's not their stories. I would use a little bit.
But
I might even put it into someone else's mouth. I might actually use, a story, a soldier's story for a tiger or whatever.
Romesh, we've just been told we've got to wrap up in 3 minutes, and we've barely begun. So I'm
But
gonna
we
ask
can
you-
rebel,
We
you
can
know.
rebel.
What are they going to
fight
do?
back.
Oh, you Sri
Stay
Lankans
still.
fighting.
Don't move out of
Always
your
with the
seats.
rebellion, you
But
Sri
before,
Lankans. I
before we
mean,
go, I'm going to ask a real whopper here and ask both of you, why is it that Sri Lanka seems to specialize in violence? What is it about us that kind of, this hidden violence, and I think you call it at one stage a pox, the toxin that runs through our blood.
Yeah.
Why is it? I mean, maybe
You
both of you being outsiders
You
can
want
tell
an
me.
easy answer.
we,
to
want,
that.
we have 90 seconds each.
Yeah,
Go.
a quick answer.
No, look,
Easy or not?
I think there's about 8 books that I've done, and each of those increasingly have been trying to answer that question. Why? But it's not a Sri Lankan thing. Come on, it's a worldwide. It's everywhere.
But we have
why do
PhDs
these?
in it.
Why do these things happen in India? Why do these things? It
No, but
happens all
I
over.
tend to agree with Ashok because I go from India to Sri Lanka, and in India we wear our warts on our sleeve. I mean, you land in India and you notice both the advantages but also the uglinesses that kind of persist in Indian society. In Sri Lanka, I had to it felt like I had to peel away like 2 layers of skin at the top, beautiful glowing skin, nourished with Dove soap every day and so on. And you peel these 2 layers away, and then you see as you say, the toxin in the bloodstream. And it was something that kind of erupts in pustules all across the
Well,
island.
there's a lot of hidden violence, and this has been true for a long time. And Sri Lanka was a sort of social scientist dream world at one point.
Yeah.
All people from all over the world went to study, and discovered the incredibly high levels of domestic violence in this country, or extremely high levels of suicide rates. And this is long before the war.
Long before the war.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with the war. One other thing, so we really don't have so much time, but just to ask both of you, now we've had, events have overtaken us since this session was planned and put up. We've had an election, and incredibly, the ship seems to have suddenly turned, that 1 inch that it's turning. What are your views, both of you, on this very quickly? And if you'd written these books now, might they have had a different look to them? Because they're both kind of bleak, your books, I have to tell you.
They are kind of bleak, and I mean, I'm not very
Well,
sure.
it's a
that,
happy story.
and I'm not sure that my bleakness has entirely dissipated with the election. I mean, for people in the audience to whom I can quickly describe the new president, who has split away from the old president's party, taking several of his loyalists with him, and so there is the fear, or the caution at least, that this president is a slightly ameliorated version of Mahinda Rajapaksa. And we don't know yet what he's got planned for the country. I mean, he had to set himself in opposition to Rajapaksa to even begin to start getting votes. But we don't know if he's actually like that. So I mean, with Sri Lanka, and especially with everything I've learned in researching this book and everything I've learned about the past sort of 30 years, it's very difficult for me to be entirely optimistic the way some people are.
Romesh?
Well, I mean, I think the most gratifying thing about it is that something that seemed inconceivable did happen. And presumably, the people who are having a really bad time are the astrologers, including the one.
That's true.
Including the one who advised Mr. Rajapaksa to go for this
He
election.
checked himself into a hospital very recently.
Yes, he did, and then he's also made a few pronouncements saying we sometimes get it wrong, which seems not an easy way to get out of a very, very bad situation. But I think that whole process, the fact that there was a peaceful transition, whatever people say may have been going on in the background, it happened, and I think that is something that is very positive. But yeah, the future is always uncertain. It's very uncertain at the moment. Lots of things have to be delivered, otherwise it'll dissipate. If I was writing the book now, well, every book is connected to every other book. So I'm always writing. Vasanta hasn't disappeared. He keeps knocking on my door and saying, you want to go somewhere else? So we're going other places as well. If this hadn't been published yet, I guess that'd just be another story. And it might be, who knows, it might have been Mr. Rajapaksa who gets in a cab because he doesn't have his limousine anymore.
As long as it's not a white van, that's all we need.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Samanth Subramaniam, Romesh Gunasekera.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Samanth Subramaniam, Romesh Gunasekera, and Ashok Ferrey. This was brought to you by Rajasthan Patrika series.